Here we are again, advancing with watercolor in New York City. We're painting on location this week in New York City. A variety of motifs, primarily through Central Park and the areas around Central Park. Today I'm working in Columbus Circle. I've done a painting in the morning looking out towards the statue at Columbus Circle from the park, and today I'm interested in painting a scene from the other direction, which looks towards the park, and you can see the monument in full view. You can see how the light is now out in all its splendor, and our scene is that of a backlit scene where the light is coming from behind and giving us some sharp shadows, a deep contrast in the facing buildings, and I've got my hot dog in my hand. I've had a little bit of lunch. Always an enjoyable part when you're painting outside is to grab something from the street vendors, and it just tastes so good when you're outside. What else can I say? So I'm looking at the scene, and this is the finished painting of the scene across the circle. And what I've done is trying to give a really strong presence and a feeling of animation to the cabs that circle Columbus Circle and that you see everywhere in New York City. And I've exaggerated the size a little bit. I've exaggerated their pitch and angle to make them feel like they're jostling. I've placed them in an area of the painting where there's a high amount of contrast, and I've tried to surround them, accompany them with scenes, with parts of the scene such as the descending foliage, a crosswalk where I've put pedestrians, a huge bank of buildings rising behind them to give a real flavor of a bright sunny day in New York City. So I'm doing an underpainting also to proceed to get everything going, and using a lot of yellow, a bit of green, and planning to counter that with deeper hues in the second stage of the painting. This helps me to kind of set the stage and the lighter notes of the painting so that I can relate the darker passages with more accuracy. And if I feel I'm comfortable when I'm painting an area, I can use more flair with the brushwork. I can use more expression in the brushwork, and that's what I'm hoping for when I'm painting shadows and smaller parts of this painting, is to employ a little bit of fun with the brushwork. But right now we're painting the undertone. The undertone has a purpose. It helps the successive layers to sort of glow. Today's day allows for that. What I mean by that is it's a very dry day, not much humidity in the air, strong sun, so the painting will dry very quickly, and there's not a lot of waiting around. If we're painting in inclement weather where there's a lot of humidity or even rain or evening time, then the painting does not dry as quickly, and we have to have a different strategy. This is important when you're working out of doors, is while you're forming your watercolor plan, to give a thought to the sequence and what's going to be the best sequence for this particular painting. If I can, I enjoy doing an underpainting. I find that I can take advantage of the transparent nature of watercolor and let some of this underpainting come through the successive layers and impart a glow to the shadows, or to the mysterious areas in the painting, areas that are built up of one or two layers, two or three layers actually. Here I'm executing that broad crosswalk that leads to the park, and in actuality this slopes down a little bit. there's a downward movement to it. But I want to keep it nice and flat so that I can take more advantage of the cabs and the pedestrians that are moving across the scene. Once I produce the undertones, then I put this in the sun to dry and come back and work on dry paper so I can get hard edges through the areas where I need a high contrast. For example, when I'm painting behind the foliage or behind the taxis, it's going to be utilizing a very hard edges and strong contrast, especially lower in the painting, to give that feeling of a backlit scenario. Right now, I'm applying the wash for the foliage, trying to use the side of the brush and keep sort of an irregular shape to the mass of foliage that's coming down from the left-hand side. The trees are full right now. It's been a long winter and a brief spring, but the trees still have that spring green to them, very luminescent, a lot of yellow in that green, and so that's one of the reasons I use that as a part of the underpainting, is so that I could take advantage of that yellow glow. When we're working out of doors, it's important to simplify the large areas of the painting. In fact, if you can think of your painting in terms of 3 shapes, it helps a lot to keep that simplicity. And I'm very much building up the foliage as one shape moving through the monument. I'll even connect the monument with a similar tone, but a different color, more of a bluish color, as I build this part of the painting. And then you'll see I also keep the buildings in the background as one shape, even though it's made up of 10 or 20 buildings, different buildings that all have a little different color, a little different character to them. For me, this is a background element, a supporting element, and I make an effort to keep it simple. I squint my eyes so that all of these buildings look like they're connected, or in this case, like all the trees are one tree basically, a little gathering of trees all coming together. And I squint my eyes so that I can see them this way. This is looking at a scene as an artist might look at a scene, to gain some recognition of the simplicity of things, the commonality of certain passages, so that you can paint them that way. If you can paint them that way, we can always return at another stage and divide them or separate them or add complexity. I think one of the hardest stages for the amateur to sort of acquire is this ability to simplify things in the beginning, in the early stages. And so you see me working with a large brush. This is conducive to simplifying shapes, simplifying passages, and also to joining areas. It keeps you thinking in big strokes. And the big brush also, you can go quite long with a brush load full of paint. Watercolor brushes have that capacity to carry an enormous amount of liquid to the page. Sometimes we have to guard against carrying too much, but once you get used to that feature, to that quality of watercolor brushes, it becomes a real help. As you can see, I just build, and I can do these large shapes very quickly when I have the right consistency of paint. I think you see now how I'm building this as one shape, even though my strokes are kind of indicating a sort of angle to the buildings. I'm very much thinking of it as a single shape, a joined shape. I'm also thinking of this wash as a graded wash, going from a little lighter aspect up on top to a very dark, dark, almost black aspect as it comes to bear on the tops of the cars that are coming out of the shadow. Here's where I want there to be some tension, some interest. While the paint is wet, I'll drop in a few very, very strong darks and use that as a way to pull those taxis forward, give them a real presence in the painting. If we can do this, if we can manage, some simplicity in the early stages, it really adds a certain underlying strength to the whole painting. A strength in terms of shapes and a strength in terms of their relationships to each other that even when we add detail, that strength remains. That strength is sort of the essence of the painting. When you're working in a scene like this, another challenge for the outdoor artist, for the plein air artist, is being able to filter out the noise and the energy. It's something that we want to have in our painting, a feeling of chaos or a feeling of high energy as traffic is moving through the scene, as people are moving in front of us and around us. The sounds of horns and sirens, birds, conversations, all these, they add to our painting. They contribute to our painting. It's not like we're painting the sound directly, but we definitely have that in the back of our mind, or it seems to come through somehow when we're working on location. There's a sort of magic that allows us to bring some of that energy into the painting. When I look back at these works, I try to find what that is so that I might repeat it or I might be able to exaggerate it later on. I found that if I can exaggerate the size of some vehicles, it's not a big exaggeration, but they feel like they're bearing down on us. It creates a little bit of that energy. Or bringing people from the distance close to us also creates that sort of energy. Brushwork. Brushwork can translate that sort of energy as well. If you can keep it lively and sort of like a staccato type of pace, that translates into a staccato type of energy or a high energy in the painting. So there's lots of little subtle things that go on that we're translating through the visual language onto the paper, onto a flat surface, that we do sort of subconsciously and without knowing. I think later on when we have a time to reflect on the painting, we understand better how this is coming into being, how it's translated. So I'm looking at the background, the area that you can pretty much see my focal area now, and the rest of the painting is going to try to relate to that, try to preserve that intensity through the circle where the taxis are coming out of the shadows and coming to bear on the crosswalk. I do want the light to be sort of exaggerated, so you see me putting in some angled brush strokes across the monument, across the upper parts of the foliage, through the lower shadowed areas. This is all to build up this sort of energy through brushwork, as well as describe some of the shadow play that I'm observing with the backlit scenario. Also, it tones down that area and makes it a little more of a receding element compared to the midground, the area where we'll put some figures. We have the awnings and taxis in place. We want the background area, the upper area, to recede a little bit against all that. And so putting a shadow on top of it with energetic brushwork, yes, but the shadow helps to push that area back into the painting and allows it to function more as a background. adding some details now to that monument that we painted earlier. Here we see it from a great distance, and we can see the top part, which is a gilded statue of standing figures, and just breaks the tree line. It's a nice combination of the tree line, this monument rising up above it, and a background of the city. All these things combine to make it an interesting visual scenario, I believe. It's one of the reasons I stopped this location to paint it. Now, I was in facing traffic. I wasn't in the street, but I was very close to the edge of the street when I was doing my sketch and making my plan for the painting. However, to paint it, I moved back a little ways. I moved a little out of this line of view to where there was shade, to where there was not as much interference or even chance of someone bumping into me and sending my easel tumbling down to the ground. I moved back where it was a little safer and continued to apply the washes. The reason for that is I felt I had what I needed with the drawing. I had a good sense of the scene. I had thought through my plan and identified areas that might be problematic, areas where I felt I could sort of breeze through. And then I went about painting it. Every time that I needed another piece of information, I'd walk forward or look to the side and see if I could see it that way. But pretty much my painting, I was keeping all eyes on my painting. I didn't look up that often. I'm finding this to be more and more helpful to me as an artist when I'm working on location, because I find when I'm constantly looking up at my subject, measuring against my subject, it becomes a distraction. It becomes almost a nuisance. And if I can spend more time looking at my painting, responding to what's happening with the media, responding to what's emerging from that painting, I have a better chance of expressing that initial impression. One thing when you're working in nature, in front of nature, it's always changing. The light is always changing. The characters on the stage, of course, are only there for a brief moment, and we try to capture that moment through our understanding of the objects that we're painting. The taxis, for example, I paint a lot of cars, so I have an idea of where I want them to be and how I want them to be. The same goes for people. I've painted people for when I was in school all the time. We had a life drawing class where we had to render the figure, I would say 3 hours a day for every day for 4 years. And that's a great way to come to understand any object. When you have that amount of knowledge residing in your memory, you can pretty much put figures wherever you want them. And if you think about painting on a from a historical perspective, looking at all the work that was done to tell the stories of the church back in the Renaissance or medieval times, this is exactly how the apprentice was training, memorizing the figure so that they could place it anywhere they wanted to within the context of their painting. Well, the finished piece has come out, and I believe you're getting that feeling of dark backlit scenario with the glare coming off the cabs, crowds of people in the distance, a few figures coming out of that crowd to give us a feeling of depth in the painting and a feeling of scale. We identify, I think, with that figure that's walking the dog across the crosswalk. At least I do. Added some shadows to give a direction to the light. And hopefully the light is communicated. The busy scene at Columbus Circle. And I hope you got something from this painting. Thank you.